Today, our guest is Academy Award-nominated screenwriter Billy Ray. He has written numerous film and television shows, including the upcoming Showtime series A Higher Loyalty. Welcome, Billy Ray.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're very excited to have you. I guess I would like to start with sort of the most basic question that I think right now is a time when people are graduating and trying to figure out what to do with their lives. And I'd like to start with sort of the very beginning. I assume you went to some sort of college at some point. What did you do when it was spring of whatever year it was that you graduated? How did you go from being a student to having whatever sort of entry-level job you had in the film industry?
Well, I had an advantage that your fellow students don't have, which is I could go outside and talk to people and shake their hands. That helped. When I was at UCLA, I was UCLA undergrad. I never went to grad school. Mm-hmm. And actually, the first piece of writing I ever sold, the summer after my sophomore year, which was an episode of The Jetsons.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was my big foray into show business. But anyway, the summers after my sophomore and junior year, I had interned for 2 TV movie producers, really just whatever they needed me to do around the office and reading everything that came through for free, obviously. So in spring of my senior year, I asked if I could go talk to them, and I sat down with them and I said, I need a job. I don't know where to go. And they provided me a job, an actual paying job as their gopher. So when I got out of UCLA, I took a week off to go to New York with my girlfriend, and then came back and started working. And, I was picking up their tuxedos or grabbing cans of film or spreading, cream cheese on their bagels, whatever the hell they wanted me to do, and reading everything that came through the office, which is how I learned how to write. And then eventually they began to see that I wasn't going to embarrass them if they brought me to meetings. And so I became sort of a half-assed executive inside their company, but I was writing every single night. And it took about 3 years before I sold my first script, and about another 3 months after that before I could actually leave and just be a full-time writer.
Okay. So you were laying your groundwork for getting a job well before graduation. You were...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And again, what the COVID component of this is going to do to the job market, I don't know. I don't know that anybody does. It's going to be complicated, but more so than ever, if you can be sitting your ass down right now and writing something great, I would be doing it. I can tell you that the last 11 weeks while quarantined have been the most productive 11 weeks of my career. I wrote a movie that Francis Lawrence is going to direct, and I've written the Bibles for 2 series. And that was largely a decision not to watch the news. It was, I'm going to go in my office at 8 and I'm going to come out at 6. And you can get a lot done in 10 hours, particularly since there are no weekends anymore, right? So it's 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, you can get a lot done. And when this thing is over, God willing, you want to have material in your hands.
Okay. That's really great advice for all kinds of writers. Now you've written film and television. That was at the beginning of your career. That was very unusual. It's less unusual now. But do you, for someone who's entering in the business right now, should they be focused on one or the other, or should they just sort of write whatever? Or what do you think about sort of the segregation between those?
If Steven Zalian or Alvin Sargent, were 25 today, they'd be in TV, because the really great storytelling is in TV. Unless you want to write superhero movies, which maybe you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to write drama, it's happening on television, and I think that is going to be permanent. It seems like there is just a certain amount of territory that the feature business has just sort of surrendered to television. I think the feature business has said, we can't do Sopranos as well. We can't do Breaking Bad as well. We can't do Mad Men or whatever, fill in the blank. So I think they've surrendered that ground, And, for me, if I were a young writer right now, I'd be trying to get staffed on some great TV show.
So, this is sort of a difference in time. It used to be the way to get staffed was to write a spec script, but I hear sort of conflicting things that maybe originals are better. What do you think a writer should be focusing on if they do want to get into television? Should they be writing specs or originals or both? What's your opinion on that? Especially as a showrunner who's...
Yeah, I've only had that one piece of experience when Chris Kaiser and I made The Last Tycoon.
Which I love, by the way.
Thank you. So did I. Let's see. We wound up doing 9 episodes. I directed 3 of them. I wrote a bunch of them. But we needed a staff. We needed a writer's room. So I wound up reading 60 writing samples, met with 14 people, and hired 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those numbers are probably fairly typical. There was no version of them writing a spec of my show because my show hadn't been on the air yet.
Right.
So what I was reading was either pilots they had written, which I found very helpful, or screenplays they had written, which was slightly less helpful, A, because it takes longer to read, and you resent having to spend too much time reading any, applicant. But also because when you're a showrunner, you're not necessarily looking for someone who can construct a 110-page screenplay because that's what they have you for, right? You're going to be providing them with a lot of the guidance in terms of the story. What each of the writers shared, the 4 that I picked, they all had a voice. That was unique. They all had, the second you started reading them, it wasn't like they had some blown out action sequence and they didn't barf out their entire story on page 1. There was just a voice. There was a point of view about the world that was interesting, that made me want to go from page 1 to page 2 and made me want to go from page 2 to page 3. It could be the way they described characters or the way their characters related to the world or just their point of view of the world. But the ones that I hired were the ones that didn't sound like everybody else. They sort of popped off the page. And that may be unique to me. There may be people out there who are staffing a show who want someone who writes down the middle. That was not me.
Interesting. So for our younger writers, people who've only written like 1 or 2 scripts for a class or something, what is your advice? Because I have heard this before about wanting to have an original voice and things like that. What is your advice to form that, to create that for somebody who doesn't have a ton of life experience? They've been through high school and college and maybe have only lived with their parents. How does someone like that create a voice or have a point of view on life when they don't have that much experience?
That's the talent part. The rest of it can be learned. I could sit down with the people on this call or anyone who's going to be watching it subsequently, and I can teach them about screenwriting structure and just how to structure a story. I can't give them that voice. I can't give them that ear for dialogue or just that innate sense of how to craft an interesting and dynamic character. That part sort of has to be there. It can be developed, but you know it when you're talking to someone who's 15, if they can tell a story or if they can't. Ask them about their day. Ask them about the last time they went to the bank or the last time they got gas or the last time they were in a market or the last phone call they were on. You can just tell if they have the rhythm of a storyteller or they don't.
So how do you suggest, when you say it's something that can be developed, even if you can't sort of create it out of a whole cloth, how do you suggest, or what's your advice for developing it? What would that entail exactly?
Read. Get your hands on as many screenplays as you can and start to assess why they work and why they don't work. And what it comes down to is really simple. Screenplays are an intellectual exercise that exists to elicit an emotional response. If I write a script and people say to me, oh my God, this is the smartest script ever, I have failed 100%, because I'm not reaching them emotionally. I'm reaching them intellectually. When you've written a script that works, people say, oh my God, I was so sad. Oh my God, I was so scared. Oh my God, I can't believe you killed that guy. Like, they react with their guts. The reason that you love movies is not because they make you think, it's because they make you feel. They give you something that you need to root for. You really want Chief Brody to catch the shark. You really want Dorothy to make it out of Oz. You really want Rocky to win. You know, these are the things that matter. They're not intellectual arguments. They're emotional arguments. So you have to learn, when you read a screenplay, is this hooking me emotionally? And if so, what? If it's not, just as important, why? And you'll find that's true when you become a professional writer, that's the key to diagnosing any notes you get as well. In other words, if someone says to you, oh, that moment on page 50 where I was supposed to cry, I didn't. Can you fix that? Chances are the fix is not on page 49. Chances are the fix is on page 1. That you need to get them hooked into that character in an emotional way sooner.
Okay. So how would you, for people who are really, really new, and like it is a lot easier now to find screenplays than it used to be. Like, they're all over the internet and stuff. But how would you, somebody who's not used to the form, how would you suggest they approach reading as opposed to watching a movie? How is that experience different, and what should they take away from that?
Pay attention to how language can either put you off or draw you in. Pay attention to whether or not the writer is showing off. Is the writer trying to convince you that they know a lot of really fancy words, or are they just trying to tell a story? Is the writer talking in pictures? That's really, really important. Are the characters behaving subtextually instead of just telling you all the time how they think and how they feel, which people behaviorally just do not do? Look at ways that the writer is showing his or her hand, because great writers don't do that.
Okay. Can you tell us, so this is a little bit more of a craft question than a business question, but I remember when we had spoken before, you talked a lot about subtext. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to putting subtext into your scripts and the way you think about subtext? Because that's a concept I think at least I do, and I think a lot of people had trouble understanding.
Sure. You can write the first draft with no subtext at all. Characters can say exactly what they think and exactly what they feel, and the story will track, and it'll make a ton of sense. It'll just be a really shitty movie, or a movie that no one wants to make, and certainly a movie that no actor wants to be in. So once you've got your story actually tracking, then go back and look at lines of dialogue where the character is saying what they think or what they feel, and see if there's a more interesting way for them to express that idea. In other words, I love you is not nearly as interesting as I hate you when it means I love you, right? I love you is much more interesting if it means I'm bored, I'm scared, I want to go, right? Like, ask me if I love you.
Do you love me?
Yes, I love you. Okay. That's subtext, right? The text is, yes, I love you, but I clearly don't, although I actually do. But my point is, actors act the thing that's in parentheses. That's what they act. And you got to pay much more attention to that. I just got done making this 4-hour miniseries in Toronto for Showtime. You spend no time on a set talking to actors about dialogue. You spend a ton of time on set talking to them about what the dialogue means and how the dialogue can be spoken in a way to suggest all kinds of different intentions. And that's what actors do. That's what's interesting about acting. People are not paying to watch a staged reading of your screenplay. They're trying to find what's living between the words. And that's what your job is. So you can make that easier on the director, or easier on yourself if you are the director, and a lot easier on the actors if you write with subtext.
Interesting. So I'm glad that you brought up directing, because there are people like you who are writers and directors and are talented at both. But some people, they're sort of built more for one or the other. For someone who's just sort of, and again, I think a lot of people have this dream of being a director because it's sort of people see it as glamorous and stuff. But how would you suggest somebody discern whether they are a writer or a director or both or neither? Like, what do you think is the mindset of somebody somebody who wants to be in that position? How do they know if they really are meant for that kind of thing?
Well, first of all, I think directing and writing are both extensions of the same thing, which is, what is the story I'm telling, right? You're supposed to be asking yourself that question constantly when you're writing, and you're supposed to be asking yourself that question constantly when you're directing. I would say the easiest way to express it is if you were standing in a valley with 200 people, and there was a small hill right there, and you knew that we all had to get to the other side of the hill, but we weren't totally sure how to do it. If you want to be the person who stands in front of those people and says, I know how to get to the top of that hill, follow me, I'm going to get you there, you're probably a director. If you want to be one of the 200 people letting someone else tell you how to do it, you're probably not a director. And it's really that simple. Then you got to learn the tools and the language and how to motivate people. To me, the act of directing is really about surrounding yourself with talented people and putting them in a circumstance where their talent can make you look good. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as saying please and thank you and not being an asshole. Sometimes it's trying to inspire people. Sometimes it's just leading. There are directors who direct by yelling and screaming and intimidating. That's not me. There are directors who direct by pouting. Also not me. There are directors who don't talk at all to their actors. Very much not me. I want everybody on my set to have the greatest movie experience of their life. And I spend time trying to make sure that happens. Partially because I think I'm a nice person. Partially because I want them to say nice things about me. But partially because I think it leads to the best work. Everybody comes to my sets feeling safe. And I think that's part of why they do good work.
Okay. That's really interesting. As someone who works in the crew, that's very much appreciated. You can tell the difference between a director who actually cares about you and the director who just wants to get the shot.
Well, I remember when I was making a movie in Toronto, God, this 14 years ago, I inherited a crew that had just worked for a very major director. And he was kind of a prick. And part of his prickness was he had this lawn furniture that he kept outside of his trailer, but he kept this kind of chain link perimeter around it because he didn't want anyone sitting on his lawn chairs, right? So he came to the set one day and his lawn chairs had been bolted to the ceiling of the soundstage. Nice. 50 feet above him. He was looking up at his fucking lawn chairs. No one ever took credit for it. No one ever had to. It was just the crew's way of saying, you're a dick and we don't appreciate it. Well, I know I don't want to be that guy. I'd much rather have my crew love me.
No one's ever tied your lawn chairs to the roof of the soundstage?
No, I make it a point to make sure that they have lawn chairs.
That's nice. So going back a little...
Not to...
no, go ahead.
Not to overstate the point, but it's also learning the names of all the crew, shaking hands with every crew member at the end of every day of production. Thanks very much. Great day today. Get some sleep. Have a great weekend. Oh my God, we're killing it. Great work. Every day. And learning their names. It's also, 2 times in the last, we had the shoot, the miniseries was 51 days. There were 2 times where I paid for a masseuse to just come to set and just had the producer announce to the set, look, here's a gift from the director. If you get 10 minutes, go get a massage, go get a neck rub. Just providing shit like that. One day I provided a coffee cart from Starbucks. It's just ways of saying to people, I can't do this without you. I value you. I need you. And they appreciate it because they're they all have sort of battered child syndrome. They're all so used to directors who are shitheads. It takes about 3 days of being nice for them to even realize you're not putting on an act. That's actually the genuine you. They all react the same way.
Oh, I love that approach. And I've never worked on one of your sets, but I have seen that kind of thing, and it does get a lot. From my experience, it gets a lot of better work out of people. To go back a little bit in the conversation, you talked a lot about getting you mentioned getting the emotion out and not just making it an intellectual exercise. That's an interesting statement from you, I think, maybe a little bit surprising, because so much of your work is based on, or a lot of your films have been based on real life. The one that you were nominated for an Oscar was the miniseries you have coming up is based on real life. Sure. How do you approach like factual stories like that when your goal is to be emotional? How do you bridge that?
Comey is a great example.
Okay.
James Comey, former director of the FBI, very controversial in the 2016 election, and then fired by Donald Trump 5 months after that. When I went to pitch that, and that was a pretty cool experience because I was sitting next to James Comey. Huh. I was pitching it, and network executives came to us in kind of a revolving door. That was pretty cool. But the first line of that pitch was, "This is a love story between a man and an institution. And everything he does is in defense of that institution." Immediately setting the terms of the debate. This is an emotional experience. And then you have to mean it. You have to go out and make that. But the point is, any story can and must be framed in terms of its emotional valence.
I see. That's so regardless of how true or not true, whether it's a fantasy world like Hunger Games or a real thing that's ripped from the headlines.
That is absolutely the truth. What that movie wound up being about, and it really revealed itself as we were shooting more than as I was writing. That movie is about how heartbreaking it is to be a public servant in the age of Donald Trump. That if you really care about America and you really care about the institutions to make America great, this is a completely heartbreaking moment for you. That's a very emotional idea. Now, conversely, Hunger Games, which is not a true story, it is a novel. I wrote that as if it were a true story. What happened to me was when I read that book, my daughter happened to be the age of Katniss Everdeen, and something clicked in my head, and I decided I'm going to write this like it's a true story. And I'm going to come from a place of total outrage that a government would do this to children. And that's how I wrote it. I wrote it pissed off, as if it were really happening. And that was hugely helpful.
Okay. That is really great advice. So since we're sort of talking about politics, I don't necessarily want to get into like whatever is the headline today, because, people might be watching this, a while from now. And, but I am sort of curious how, as someone like you who obviously cares a lot about what's going on in the world all the time, how do you respond to people who say things like, oh, you shouldn't inject politics in entertainment, or things like that? Like, what do you feel about when someone says something like that?
Well, first of all, I think Donald Trump injected entertainment into politics. So I don't know that that's really a fair criticism. I think what Pablo Picasso said is true. Art is a lie that tells us the truth. And if you stay true to that, I think you're okay. My job on Comey, my job on Captain Phillips, my job on Richard Jewell, my job on any of the movies that I've made that have been true stories is to serve, the story gods, of course, to make sure that it's entertaining and to stay extremely true to the spirit of events, and in some cases, the details of events. And if people find that to be entertaining, great. Everybody wins. I'm not making documentaries. If I were, the rules would be slightly different. I'm trying to tell great stories that happen to be true. And as I look back on some of my favorite movies, they were true stories. All the President's Men is a true story. Amadeus is a true story. There are a bunch of them out there that are wildly entertaining movies. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is a completely entertaining movie that is true. Real life, I find much more interesting than fiction.
That's really interesting. One other thing on that topic, I'm sort of curious. How do you avoid? You want to focus on being entertaining. How do you avoid, if you do care a lot about the sort of the theme and the politics and all of that, how do you avoid getting caught up in the polemical side of things? How do you make sure that it's entertaining?
Well, don't write it as a polemic, right? I mean, if you find yourself making speeches that are you talking instead of your characters talking, stop. Yes, this movie has a political point of view. Someone who polarizes as much as Trump does is going to give everybody a point of view. I can hardly imagine anything more boring than someone telling the story of James Comey and Donald Trump without having a point of view about it. That said, it's not a polemic at all. I think it's a very even-handed, fair telling of the story. And I think when the world sees it, they'll agree. Okay.
So how do you that raises another question, I think. How do you get the other point of view when you're creating, because obviously you do have a very strong point of view. How do you make sure that you're not like making a cartoon version of the of whatever the opposite view, whether it's the Comey movie or any other sort of topical movie that someone might be working on? How do you get the other views?
Well, if you're doing Captain Phillips, you also tell the story of the Somali pirate. You dimensionalize them. You humanize them. Nobody wants a one-dimensional bad guy, because then your hero doesn't have to be any great shakes in order to defeat them. You have to have a great bad guy in order to enrich the experience of your hero. So I always look at my bad guys, always, and I try to understand the world from their point of view. When I was on the set working with Brendan Gleeson, who plays Trump, we talked a lot about what was right in what he was saying.
Oh, really?
Never saying to him, hey, you're a mustache twirling villain. Just go nuts, right? And the best example of that to me is go look at Fatal Attraction, which for me is kind of a perfect movie. Glenn Close, from her point of view, is completely right. Like, she played that not as a crazy person. She played that as a woman who's saying, wait a minute, you slept with me all weekend and then never called me again? Fuck you. And from her point of view, she's right. So that taught me a lot about how antagonists are supposed to behave. In the case of Comey, in particular, I did not have the benefit of interviewing Donald Trump, but I had the benefit of sitting down with people who agreed with him. And that was part of my research. I flew all over the place talking to reporters and in some cases Republican lobbyists. I wanted to know why they felt the way they felt. And that was very helpful to me.
That's really honest of you, that not everybody does something like that. Not everybody seeks out disagreement like that.
I wasn't seeking disagreement. I was just trying to make sure the script wouldn't be boring. My fear of boring people is, I think, the biggest driver in my entire career.
Interesting. I have one more question before we open up the floor to the audience, and it's sort of a tough one. It's a little bit of an awkward question. You've had some movies that were hugely successful financially, some movies that weren't, some movies that were very well received critically, and some movies that weren't. And for someone who's creative, who the first time you get your for those who are watching this, who will hopefully someday get a movie out there that will be seen and reviewed and stuff, what do you how do you suggest either taking success or taking failure, or if you want to take both of those questions, how should someone handle that?
In 2015, look at your cat. In 2015. I had made a movie called Secret in Their Eyes, which was an adaptation, a remake of a great Argentine film. As we were making it, we were all measuring each other for tuxedos. I mean, we thought, oh my God, this movie is going to be fucking amazing. Brilliant cast. They were all killing it. Script was totally holding together. About 2 weeks before we released, it became really clear that we were not going to be a hit and that the reviews were going to tear my head off, largely for just having made a movie from this beloved Argentine film, but some of them just genuinely didn't like the movie. And it was a pretty shocking and humbling, if not humiliating, experience. The reviews of my previous movies, you know, Shattered Glass and Breach and Captain Phillips, had been so strong that I kind of thought I was the critic's boy, and that was hubris on my part. I was wrong. So I sat down with my kids, who at that time I think were 14 and 19, and I said, look, Dad is about to get punched in the face in public, and I'm not happy about it, but I'll be okay. And this is part of the job. If I am to go on the ride that is Captain Phillips or the Hunger Games, I have to expose myself to the risk of this. I made something. People don't seem to like it. That hurts. I'd like to roll on the floor and cry, but I don't have time. I got other shit to do. So the movie came out and we got our brains beaten in. That was a Friday, and that was not a fun weekend. But Monday I went back to work and started writing something else. What failure does for you is it takes away the pleasure that you used to get reading other people's shitty reviews. I used to really, really enjoy someone else's movie getting crushed. That went away. That experience made that go away. I don't think it's a bad thing to be humbled. I don't think it's a bad thing. It doesn't feel good, but I don't think it's a bad thing to question, how did I get in this position? What about the movie did not work? What would I do differently? You know, making a movie is a little bit like raising kids. It takes about 20 years to know if you actually did a good job or not. So that movie was released in 2015. In 2035, I've already got it on my schedule to watch that movie and decide then whether or not I think it's good. Until then, I just don't know. What I know for sure is that movie tried to fall apart, I don't know, 10 times, where the only thing keeping it together was the force of my will. I kept that movie from collapsing 10 times. And as I look back now, I realized the universe was telling me something, and I didn't listen. And if the only thing keeping your movie on track is you, maybe there's something you shouldn't be doing there. Despite the fact that movie stars said yes to it, despite the fact that the studio was actually financing, the signs were all there that I was walking into a buzzsaw. I chose to bet on myself in a way that I probably should not have. And I'm very, very sorry that I made that movie. Really sorry I made that movie, which does not mean I'm ashamed of it. I'm particularly proud of the performances in it. But people lost money betting on me, and that's not good for my batting average. So that was a mistake, and hopefully I'll never make it again.
So that's the end of the first half of the show. We're going to go into the subscriber portion, where we get questions from the audience, people who are supporters on Tappa. If you guys want to listen to the rest of it, and if you want to be able to ask questions on future shows, just go to the Tappa Patreon page. It's just patreon.com/TAPA.